How did I go from burying my mother pregnant and divorced to becoming the one crime lord my ex-husband fears? I thought the worst day of my life would be burying my mother. I was wrong. The worst day was when my husband, the man I'd given everything to, the father of the child growing inside me, handed me divorce papers over her casket. No explanation, no mercy, just cold eyes and a turn back as the dirt hit the wood. I stood there, 6 months pregnant, hollowed out, watching the only family I had left disappear into the ground while the man I loved walked away like I was nothing. But grief has a way of hardening you, and rage is fuel. While he thought I'd crumble, I rebuilt. While he celebrated his freedom, I learned the game he thought I was too soft to play. I took every lesson he never meant to teach me, every contact he thought I'd never use, every weakness he forgot I witnessed. 3 years later, I'm not the broken wife he discarded. I'm the rival he didn't see coming. And when he finally realizes who's been bleeding his empire dry, it'll be too late. Because the woman he left crying at a funeral is now the one holding the knife to his throat. The rain fell like judgment on Evergreen Cemetery, cold November sheets that plastered Sienna Morrow's black dress to her swollen belly and turned the freshly dug earth into rivers of mud. Boston had never felt so cruel, so indifferent to grief. She stood at the graveside with her hand pressed against the 6-month curve of her pregnancy, watching her mother's casket descend into ground that seemed eager to swallow it. 37 mourners had come. Now only 5 remained. The priest had fled under an umbrella 20 minutes ago, his condolences trailing behind him like exhaust. Her mother's colleagues from the accounting firm, a neighbor who'd brought casseroles during the hospice months, and behind her, close enough that she could smell his cologne cutting through the rain, stood her husband. Cassian Aldrich hadn't spoken since the service began, hadn't touched her, hadn't acknowledged the child growing inside her. The child he'd demanded she conceive to secure his position in the Aldrich crime family. Air production, his father had called it. Sienna had called it love. She'd been catastrophically wrong. We need to talk. His voice came from directly behind her now, low and empty of warmth. Before we returned to the house, my mother just died, Cassian. She didn't turn around. Couldn't bear to see whatever expression he was wearing while she watched the cemetery workers begin shoveling dirt onto the casket. It can wait. It cannot. His hand closed around her elbow, not gentle, not supportive, possessive in a way that made her unborn daughter kick against her ribs in warning. He steered her away from the grave, away from the departing mourners, toward the black town car idling at the cemetery's edge. The driver, Aldo Ferrante, stepped out to open the rear door. He'd worked for the Aldrich family for 30 years, had always smiled at her, called her little Signora, asked about the baby every time he saw her. Today, Aldo stared at the mud like he wanted it to swallow him whole. Wrong. Everything about this moment was catastrophically wrong. Sienna lowered herself into the leather seat, one hand braced on the doorframe, the other cradling her belly. Cassian slid in beside her. The locks engaged with a sound that made her think of coffin lids closing. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Cream-colored, expensive, heavy with the weight of something irreversible. What is this? Divorce papers. He said it like announcing a schedule change. My attorney filed this morning. I need your signature before the end of the week. The words fractured in her mind, refusing to reassemble into meaning. Divorce, this morning. While she'd been selecting her mother's burial dress, while she'd been writing a eulogy she could barely deliver, while she'd been trusting that her marriage remained intact. I don't understand. It's straightforward. He adjusted his cufflinks, not meeting her eyes. The marriage has served its purpose. I've made other arrangements. You'll receive a settlement. I'm not unreasonable, but I want this finalized before the child arrives. 3 months. He wanted her erased in 3 months. Other arrangements. Her voice came out hollow. What does that mean? Giuliana Marcellino has agreed to become my wife. The alliance benefits both families. Her father controls the ports. The merger will... You're replacing me. The realization crashed over her like the rain, drowning everything. You've been planning this. For how long, Cassian? How long have you been waiting for the right moment to throw me away? Something flickered across his face. Not guilt. Inconvenience. the mild irritation of a man whose timeline had developed a wrinkle. The child will be provided for, generously, but you need to understand, you were never meant to be permanent, Sienna. You were a placeholder, a womb with the right genetics and the wrong last name. The baby kicked hard, as if absorbing her mother's devastation. Sienna pressed her hand to the spot, fighting nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. I loved you. The words escaped before she could stop them. Pathetic. True. I thought you loved me. Love is a liability in this business. He reached past her, pushed the door open. Rain sprayed across her face, mixing with tears she couldn't control. Sign the papers, leave them with Aldo by Friday. And Sienna, don't make this difficult. You won't like how I handle difficult. He stepped out of the car, umbrella materializing from nowhere, and walked toward a second vehicle she hadn't noticed. A woman waited inside, Juliana Marcelino. Beautiful, connected. Everything Sienna wasn't. Cassian didn't look back. Not once. The town car pulled away from the cemetery, leaving Sienna alone with Aldo's rigid silence and the envelope sitting on the seat beside her like a bomb. Rain streaked the windows. Her mother's grave disappeared behind sheets of gray. And somewhere inside her chest, something fundamental began to shift. Not breaking, hardening. She picked up the envelope and opened it with steady hands. Read every clause, every provision, every carefully worded paragraph, designed to strip her of everything while pretending to be generous. Buried in the fine print, she found it. The real reason for the timing. Upon dissolution of marriage, all knowledge pertaining to Aldrich family business operations shall be considered confidential and subject to non-disclosure under penalty of... He wasn't just divorcing her. He was silencing her. Because she'd seen things, heard things, understood things she'd never been meant to understand. Aldo. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Take me to my mother's house, not the Aldrich estate. My mother's house. His eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, conflicted. Mrs. Aldrich, I have instructions. I'm not Mrs. Aldrich anymore. He made that clear. She held his gaze, something new crystallizing in her spine. My mother's house. Now, please. The car turned left instead of right, and Sienna Morrow began planning her resurrection. 3 months later, Sienna learned what it meant to give birth alone. The safe house was a 2-room apartment above a laundromat in Dorchester, paid for with cash her mother had hidden in a coffee can behind the furnace. February wind rattled the windows while Sienna gripped the metal headboard and screamed into a pillow, terrified that someone would hear, terrified that no one would come. The midwife, a 63-year-old former nurse named Theodora Vance, who asked no questions and accepted only cash, arrived with 4 minutes to spare. By dawn, Sienna was holding a 7-pound daughter with dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Name? Theodora asked, pen hovering over unofficial paperwork. Sienna looked at the baby, at the impossible smallness of her fingers, at the future stretching out before them like a minefield. Marisol, the name her mother had always loved. Marisol Morrow. No Aldrich, no connection to the man who'd thrown them away. Her daughter would carry her grandmother's legacy, not her father's curse. Theodora left an hour later with $2,000 and a promise of silence. Sienna lay in the narrow bed, Marisol sleeping against her chest, and let herself cry for the first time since the funeral. Not from sadness, from exhaustion, from relief, from the terrifying weight of understanding that she was now completely, utterly alone. The next 6 weeks blurred together, feeding, sleeping, jumping at every sound. She disabled her phone the day she'd left the cemetery, bought a burner with cash, contacted no one from her old life. As far as Cassian Aldrich knew, his discarded wife had signed the papers, taken her settlement, and vanished into the anonymous mass of broken women who didn't matter enough to track. She was counting on that assumption. It was Marisol's 8-week birthday when Sienna finally returned to her mother's house to collect the last of her belongings. She'd hired a woman named Petra Okonkwo to watch the baby, another cash arrangement, another anonymous transaction. The house was supposed to be empty, cleaned out by estate lawyers, ready for sale. The lockbox in the basement was supposed to be empty too. Sienna had almost missed it. A section of floorboard that sat slightly higher than its neighbors, hidden beneath a shelf of forgotten Christmas decorations. Her mother had shown it to her once, years ago, laughing about how every house needed secrets. Sienna had assumed it held old love letters, maybe a few emergency hundreds. Instead, she found a leather satchel containing 3 items that would change everything. The first was a ledger, handwritten, coded, columns of numbers that meant nothing to her at first glance, but clearly meant something to someone. Initials, dates, amounts that ran into 7 figures. The second was a letter addressed to her mother from a man named Raphael Tomasi. The name hit her like a fist. Tomasi was the family that controlled Boston's South Side, the Aldrich's most bitter rival. The letter was 15 years old, written in formal Italian, thanking her mother for her years of service and wishing her well in retirement. Service. Her mother. The woman who'd worked at a mid-sized accounting firm for 30 years, who'd driven a Honda Civic and clipped coupons and never, ever spoke about anything more dangerous than overdue library books. The third item was a photograph. Her mother, young and striking, standing between 2 men Sienna recognized from news coverage and police reports. Raphael Tomasi on the left, and on the right, with his arm around her mother's shoulders like they were old friends, Dominic Aldrich, Cassian's father, the man who'd approved her marriage because her genetics were acceptable and her background was clean. Her mother had worked for both families, had kept their books, had known their secrets, and she'd never said a word. Sienna sat on the cold basement floor, Marisol's absence aching in her arms, and read the ledger cover to cover. It took 3 hours. By the end, her hands were shaking, and her mind was racing with implications she could barely process. The ledger documented everything: shell companies, money laundering routes, bribed officials, and most damning of all, a series of payments from the Aldrich family to the Tomasi family during what should have been the height of their war. Secret cooperation, hidden alliances, betrayals that would ignite chaos if exposed. Her mother had been the keeper of secrets, the woman who knew where the bodies were buried because she'd balanced the books. That paid for the shovels, and now Sienna knew too. She photographed every page, transferred the files to an encrypted drive, and returned the originals to the lockbox. Then she sat in her dead mother's kitchen and made a decision that would define the next 3 years of her life. Cassian Aldrich had thrown her away because he thought she was nothing, a placeholder, a womb with the wrong last name. She was going to show him exactly how wrong he was, but not yet. Not while Marisol was small and vulnerable, not while Sienna was still learning the shape of this new world she'd inherited. First, she needed to study, to plan, to become someone Cassian Aldrich would never see coming. The woman who left that basement was not the woman who'd entered it. Sienna Morrow was dead. Someone new was about to be born. 2 years and 7 months after her mother's funeral, Sienna watched Cassian Aldrich's weapon shipment burn from a rooftop 3 blocks away. The warehouse on the South Boston waterfront had contained 14 crates of military-grade firearms destined for distribution throughout New England. Street value, $2.3 million. Insurance value, 0, because insuring illegal weapons required paperwork that led to prison cells. The fire department was already responding, sirens wailing through the November night. But they'd arrived too late to save anything except the building's skeleton. Beside her, wrapped in a fleece blanket against the cold, 3-year-old Marisol slept in her portable car seat, oblivious to the orange glow painting the sky. She'd gotten used to unusual hours, unusual locations, the strange rhythm of her mother's double life. Beautiful work, the voice came through Sienna's earpiece, warm with approval. Detonation was clean. No casualties. Maximum financial damage. You're getting quite good at this. I had excellent teachers. Sienna watched the flames climb higher, satisfaction spreading through her chest like heat. What's the chatter? Aldrich's people are losing their minds. They're blaming the Tomasi family, exactly as you predicted. Cassian ordered a retaliatory strike on their gambling operation in Quincy. Should happen within the hour. The voice belonged to Orson Weatherby, a 58-year-old former British intelligence officer who'd been working private security in Boston when Sienna found him 18 months ago. He'd been skeptical at first. A single mother with a toddler and a ledger full of secrets didn't match his usual clientele, but the money was good and her plan was sound. and he'd always had a weakness for underdogs with fire in their eyes. Now he ran her intelligence network, coordinated her operations, helped her become the phantom that was slowly bleeding Cassian Aldrich's empire dry. And the Tomasis, she asked. They'll retaliate against the retaliation? Already mobilizing. You've successfully triggered the third escalation this quarter. Both families are hemorrhaging resources, fighting each other while we pick their pockets. Sienna allowed herself a small smile. It was working. Slowly, carefully, invisibly, it was working. She'd spent the first year after Marisol's birth studying, learning, absorbing everything her mother's ledger revealed about the underground economy of organized crime. The second year, she'd built her network, carefully recruited allies who had grievances against the Aldrich family or the Tomasi family or both. Former employees who'd been cheated, competitors who'd been crushed, widows of men who'd disappeared into shallow graves. The third year, she'd started striking. Small operations at first. A hijacked truck here, a corrupted shipment there. Nothing that could be traced to a pattern. Nothing that pointed to a single enemy. Just chaos, confusion, the slow erosion of trust and profit that made crime families vulnerable. But tonight's operation was bigger, bolder, a statement. Her phone buzzed, a message from her inside source at the Aldrich compound, a housekeeper named Valentina who'd been passing information for 6 months in exchange for enough money to get her sister out of an abusive marriage. Cassian furious, demanding answers. Mentioned phantom rival twice. Wife Juliana pushing for increased security on remaining shipments. Tension between them visible. She slept in separate room again. Sienna read the message twice, committing the details to memory before deleting it. The marriage between Cassian and Juliana Marcelino was failing. She'd known it would. Juliana had expected a partnership of equals. She'd gotten a husband who treated her like a political asset, the same way he'd treated Sienna, only with better packaging. Marisol stirred in her car seat, making a soft sound that instantly refocused every cell in Sienna's body. She knelt beside her daughter, adjusting the blanket, brushing dark curls from the small forehead. Shh, baby girl, we're going home soon. Gray eyes opened, blinked twice, and closed again. Cassian's eyes, a constant reminder of the man Sienna was systematically destroying. There's something else. Orson's voice carried a note of concern. Cassian's hired a new investigator, specialized in tracking phantom organizations. Man named Declan Holt, former FBI, forced retirement, rumored to have found the Kozlov family's accountant in 48 hours when the Bureau had been looking for 3 years. Sienna stood, her satisfaction cooling into wariness. How good is he? Good enough to be a problem. He starts next week. A new variable, a threat she hadn't anticipated. She looked at the burning warehouse, then at her sleeping daughter, then at the city spread out below, a chessboard she'd been learning to master. Then we accelerate the timeline. Her voice was calm, despite her racing pulse. The summit in Providence, the one next month. I need to be there. Sienna, that's a room full of people who would kill you if they knew who you were. Then they won't know who I am. She lifted Marisol's car seat, cradling her daughter against her hip with practiced ease. I've been a ghost long enough. It's time to become a legend. The warehouse collapsed behind her, sending sparks spiraling into the November sky like vengeful stars. Somewhere across the city, Cassian Aldrich was screaming at his men, demanding answers about an enemy he couldn't see. He had no idea the enemy was his own discarded wife, and Sienna intended to keep it that way, until the moment she was ready to watch his face when he finally understood. Juliana Marcelino Aldrich threw her wine glass against the marble fireplace at 11:47 p.m., and Cassian didn't flinch. He'd grown accustomed to her outbursts over the past 3 years. The passion that had seemed attractive during their courtship had curdled into something exhausting, a constant storm he no longer had energy to weather. 3 shipments in 2 months. Her accent thickened when she was angry. The Italian her father had insisted she preserve bleeding through her polished Boston vowels. 3 shipments, Cassian. My father is asking questions I cannot answer. Your father can ask whatever he wants. I'm handling it. Handling it? She laughed, sharp and bitter. You're hemorrhaging money. The Tomasi family denies involvement. Your own men are whispering about weakness. And this phantom rival, this ghost, continues to make you look like a fool." The word landed exactly where she'd intended. Cassian's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "Declan Holt starts tomorrow. He'll find whoever's responsible." "And then what? You'll make an example of them?" Juliana crossed to the bar, poured herself another glass of wine with hands that trembled slightly. "The way you made an example of the Kozlov brothers, the way you handled the situation in Providence last spring. Your examples aren't working, husband. Your empire is bleeding, and I'm beginning to wonder if my father made a mistake trusting you with his daughter." "Your father trusted me with his ports. You were part of the package." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Juliana went still, wine glass halfway to her lips, and for a moment Cassian saw something flash across her face that looked almost like grief. Then it hardened into the familiar mask of aristocratic contempt she wore like armor. "I'm sleeping in the East Wing tonight. Don't follow me." She left without waiting for a response. The door closed with exaggerated softness, somehow worse than a slam. Cassian stood alone in the study that had belonged to his father, surrounded by leather-bound books he'd never read and portraits of ancestors who'd built what he was failing to protect. The phantom rival was destroying him, slowly, methodically, with a precision that suggested intimate knowledge of his operations. His phone buzzed. A message from Declan Holt. "Arrived in Boston, beginning preliminary analysis tonight. Meeting at 8 a.m. to discuss initial findings." Cassian typed back, "Make this your priority. I want a name within the week." The response came immediately. "You'll have one within 3 days." He should have felt reassured. Declan Holt's reputation was impeccable. The man had dismantled criminal networks that had evaded federal prosecution for decades. If anyone could find the phantom, it was him. But something nagged at Cassian. A splinter of unease lodged beneath his thoughts. The attacks had started roughly 30 months ago, small disruptions he'd initially attributed to the Tomasis, or random competitors. They'd escalated gradually, each strike more sophisticated than the last. Each one targeting vulnerabilities that shouldn't have been visible from outside. Whoever was doing this knew him, knew his business, knew exactly where to cut to cause maximum pain with minimum exposure. His mind drifted, unbidden, to Sienna, the wife he had discarded at her mother's funeral, the woman who'd signed his divorce papers and vanished so completely that even his casual inquiries had turned up nothing. She'd taken her settlement, generous, he reminded himself. He'd been generous, and disappeared into whatever anonymous life awaited women who'd outlived their usefulness. He hadn't thought about her in months, maybe longer. She'd been a means to an end, a placeholder while he negotiated the Marcelino alliance. Pretty enough, compliant enough, forgettable enough that her absence had barely registered. But now, standing in his empty study while his empire crumbled and his second wife retreated to a separate wing, he found himself wondering, what had happened to Sienna Morrow? Where had she gone? And the child, his child technically, though he'd never seen her, never asked, where was she? The questions felt dangerous, irrelevant. He pushed them away. Tomorrow Declan Holt would begin his investigation. Within days, the phantom would have a name. Within weeks, they'd have a location. And then Cassian would do what he did best, eliminate the threat and restore order to his kingdom. He poured himself a whiskey and raised the glass to the portrait of his father hanging above the fireplace. "I'm handling it," he said to the painted eyes that had never shown him warmth. "I'm handling everything." The fire crackled. The house settled into silence, and somewhere across the city, the woman he'd forgotten was planning her next move. Declan Holt arrived at the Aldrich compound at precisely 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes early, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd already solved half the puzzle. He was tall, lean, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Cassian disliked him immediately. "Tell me about the first attack." Declan settled into the chair across from Cassian's desk without waiting to be invited. "Not the one you reported to. Your people." "The first one you noticed something was wrong," Cassian frowned. "They're the same incident." "They never are." Declan opened his briefcase, withdrew a tablet, began scrolling through files. "There's always something earlier, something small enough to dismiss. A shipment that arrived late. A contact who stopped returning calls. A payment that bounced before clearing. Think." The splinter of unease twisted deeper. Cassian thought, and remembered. There was a ledger, he said slowly. My father's old bookkeeper. She died about 3 years ago. Her daughter was supposed to deliver some personal effects, but certain items were never recovered. My father assumed they'd been lost or destroyed. Declan looked up. The bookkeeper's name? Marlena Morrow. Cassian's voice caught on the surname. Her daughter was your first wife. Declan's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in his gaze. Sienna Morrow, who divorced you approximately 3 years ago and subsequently vanished. He turned his tablet around, showing Cassian a photograph. This woman? The photo showed a figure at a charity gala in Providence, face partially obscured by shadows and camera angle, wearing an emerald dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. Dark hair, confident posture, something familiar in the set of her shoulders that made Cassian's stomach clench. Who is that? That's what I intend to find out. Declan tucked the tablet away. She's been photographed at 3 events connected to your business rivals in the past 18 months. Different names each time. Impeccable false identities. And according to my preliminary analysis, she fits the profile of your phantom rival almost perfectly. Cassian stared at him. You think Sienna is behind this? I think someone wants you to think this is random chaos. It's not. Declan stood, briefcase in hand. I'll have confirmation within 72 hours. But Mr. Aldrich, if I were you, I'd start remembering exactly how that marriage ended, and why a woman you dismissed as forgettable might have decided to become unforgettable. The door closed behind him. Cassian sat motionless, the photograph burning in his memory. It couldn't be Sienna. She didn't have the resources, the connections, the ruthlessness. But even as he denied it, a cold certainty was settling into his bones. He'd made an enemy he'd never seen coming. The Providence Summit was held in a converted textile mill overlooking the Seekonk River, neutral territory maintained by the Calabrese family for exactly these kinds of gatherings. Crime lords from 6 New England families would attend, along with their advisors, their bodyguards, and their suspicions. Security was tight, identities were verified, and anyone who violated the peace risked consequences that made federal prison look appealing. Sienna adjusted her mask, a delicate confection of black lace and silver filigree, and stepped out of the town car into freezing December air. The invitation in her clutch identified her as Vivian Ashford, representing the interests of a European investment consortium looking to establish relationships in the American Northeast. The identity had cost her $40,000 and 3 months of careful cultivation. Tonight, it would either make her reputation or destroy everything she'd built. Remember, Orson's voice murmured through her earpiece, you're observing only, no direct contact with Aldrich, no provocations. Just gather intelligence and get out. Understood. She climbed the stone steps toward the mill's entrance, heels clicking against frost-slicked granite. Her heart hammered beneath the emerald silk of her gown, but her face remained serene. 3 years of practice had taught her to separate fear from function. The main hall took her breath away despite her preparation. Crystal chandeliers hung from exposed brick ceilings. A string quartet played Vivaldi in one corner, while servers circulated with champagne and canapes. And everywhere, clustered in groups of 2 and 3 and 5, stood the most dangerous people in New England, their smiles hiding decades of bloodshed. Sienna accepted a glass of sparkling water, no alcohol tonight. She needed every faculty sharp, and began her circuit of the room. She recognized faces from her research. Dominic Tomasi, Raphael's son, now running the family's legitimate businesses while his father managed operations from semi-retirement. Yvette Calabresi, the host's daughter, renowned for her brutality and her art collection in equal measure. Sergio Bianchi, whose territory in Connecticut had been slowly expanding northward. And at the far end of the hall, surrounded by lieutenants and sycophants, stood Cassian Aldrich. 3 years since she'd seen him in person. 3 years since he'd handed her divorce papers over her mother's grave and walked away without looking back. He looked older, tired. The silver at his temples had spread, and lines bracketed his mouth that she didn't remember. Juliana stood beside him, beautiful and brittle, her smile not reaching her eyes. Sienna felt nothing. That was the strangest part. She'd expected rage or grief or some complicated tangle of emotions that would threaten her composure. Instead, there was only cold calculation. He was a target, an obstacle, a problem to be solved. Vivian Ashford, a voice at her elbow made her turn. A man stood there, tall and lean, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that catalogued her like evidence. I don't believe we've met. Her blood chilled. She recognized him from Orson's briefing photographs. Declan Holt. We haven't. She extended her hand, grateful that it remained steady. And you are? A consultant. His handshake was firm, brief, assessing. Working with the Aldrich family on a matter of some delicacy. I make it my business to know everyone at gatherings like this. Your consortium, Laurent and Associates, yes? Hasn't previously shown interest in American markets. Markets evolve. Opportunities emerge. She sipped her water, buying time to steady her pulse. The Northeast has become attractive for reasons I'm not at liberty to discuss. Of course. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Tell me, Ms. Ashford, have you ever visited Boston? Before tonight, I mean? The question was a trap. She could feel its edges pressing against her carefully constructed identity. Once or twice, years ago. She allowed a small, dismissive laugh. American cities blur together after a while. No offense intended. None taken. He was still watching her with that cataloging gaze, filing away micro-expressions, voice patterns, the barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. Enjoy the evening, Ms. Ashford. I have a feeling we'll speak again. He moved away, disappearing into the crowd with unsettling efficiency. Sienna released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Get out. Orson's voice was urgent in her ear. He's suspicious. Exit now. Not yet. She couldn't leave without something concrete, some piece of intelligence that justified the risk. Give me 20 minutes. Sienna. She removed the earpiece and slipped it into her clutch. 20 minutes. That was all she needed. She worked the room with practiced ease, collecting fragments of conversation, business cards, promises of future meetings. Her cover held under casual scrutiny. The Laurent Consortium was real enough. A shell company she'd established 18 months ago specifically for occasions like this. She was making her way toward the exit, mission technically accomplished, when she felt it. The unmistakable pressure of someone's gaze. She turned, scanning the crowd. Cassian was staring at her. Not casual interest, not social curiosity. He was staring at her the way a predator stares at movement in tall grass. Focused, intent, trying to identify what he was seeing. Their eyes met across 40 feet of crowded ballroom, his brow furrowed. His lips parted slightly, recognition. Not complete. The mask helped, and the hair, and the 3 years of transformation, but something. Some flicker of familiarity that was making him look closer. Sienna turned and walked toward the exit at a measured pace. Behind her, she heard his voice, raised to carry. Wait! She didn't run. Running would confirm his suspicions. She simply collected her coat from the attendant, stepped out into the December cold, and disappeared into a waiting car that pulled away before he could reach the door. Her phone buzzed immediately. Orson. He's mobilizing his people. You've been made. Not completely. He saw something familiar, that's all. That's enough. Timeline is accelerating. He'll have your alias deconstructed within 48 hours. Sienna leaned back against the leather seat, heart finally beginning to race, now that she was clear. Then we move faster. She looked back at the mill as the car turned the corner. A figure stood at the entrance, watching her taillights disappear. Even at this distance, she could feel the intensity of his focus. The game had changed, and for the first time in 3 years, Sienna wasn't sure she was still winning. Declan Holt spread the photographs across Cassian's desk with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. 12 images, 12 different angles, all capturing the same woman from the Providence summit. Her face partially obscured, but her posture unmistakable. Vivian Ashford doesn't exist. His voice was flat, clinical. The identity was constructed 18 months ago. Excellent work, professional grade, but ultimately traceable if you know where to look. Cassian studied the photographs, that nagging familiarity still scratching at the back of his mind. Who is she? That's where it gets interesting. Declan pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. I ran her biometrics through every database I could access, legal and otherwise. Facial recognition returned no matches, but gait analysis and voice pattern comparison told a different story. He placed a final photograph on the desk. This one was older, slightly faded. A wedding portrait from 4 years ago. Cassian in a tailored suit, smiling the confident smile of a man who'd secured exactly what he wanted. And beside him, in white lace, her dark hair pinned with pearls. Sienna, the name emerged as a whisper. That's not possible. The gait analysis is 93% conclusive. Voice patterns from security footage match at 87%. Declan's expression remained neutral, but something like respect colored his tone. Your ex-wife has been remarkably busy these past 3 years, Mr. Aldrich. She's built an intelligence network that rivals some government agencies. She's cultivated relationships with your competitors and enemies. And based on my analysis, she's directly responsible for approximately $14 million in losses to your organization. Cassian couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was hearing. Sienna, the woman he'd discarded like yesterday's newspaper, the placeholder, the forgettable wife with the acceptable genetics and the quiet demeanor. She'd become his phantom rival. There's more, Declan's voice pulled him back. During my investigation, I discovered a related matter I felt you should know about. He pulled out a birth certificate, sliding it across the desk. Your ex-wife gave birth approximately 3 months after your divorce was finalized. A daughter, Marisol Morrow. The room tilted. Cassian gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles whitening. I have a daughter. You have a daughter you've never met, who is now approximately 3 years old, and who, according to my surveillance, is being raised in a secure location in the greater Boston area by your very capable and very dangerous ex-wife. A daughter, dark hair probably, gray eyes maybe, his blood, his legacy, hidden from him for 3 years, while her mother systematically dismantled his empire. Rage ignited in his chest, hot and consuming. Find them. His voice came out as a growl. I don't care what it costs. Find my daughter. I anticipated that request. Declan retrieved another document from his seemingly bottomless briefcase. I've identified 3 possible locations based on movement patterns and financial traces. However, I feel obligated to point out that approaching this situation with force would be inadvisable. Why? Because Sienna Morrow has spent 3 years preparing for exactly that scenario. She has allies, resources, and most importantly, contingencies. Declan met his gaze steadily. If you storm in with guns blazing, she'll disappear again, and this time you won't find her. Then what do you suggest? Patience, precision. You attend the Aldrich family Christmas gathering next week as planned. You maintain the appearance of normalcy while I narrow down her location. And when we move surgically. We take the child and neutralize the mother in one coordinated action. Cassian's jaw tightened at the word neutralize. Something uncomfortable stirred beneath the rage, not guilt exactly, but awareness. This was the mother of his child, the woman he'd once held in his bed, the woman he'd destroyed without a second thought. I want to talk to her. The words surprised him. Before any action is taken, I want to understand. Understand what? How she became this. He stared at the wedding photograph, at the soft smile of a woman who'd looked at him like he was her entire world. How I missed it. Declan gathered his materials, tucking them back into the briefcase with methodical efficiency. I'll arrange a meeting, neutral ground, controlled conditions. But Mr. Aldrich, prepare yourself. The woman you married doesn't exist anymore. What's left is something far more dangerous. He left without waiting for a response. Cassian sat alone in his study, the birth certificate still clutched in his hand. Marisol Morrow, his daughter, 3 years old, raised by a mother who hated him enough to burn his world to the ground. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he didn't recognize. Hello, Cassian. We should talk, midnight tomorrow. The bench in Christopher Columbus Park, where you proposed to your first wife. Come alone, or don't come at all. Same. He read the message 3 times, stared at the initial at the end. She knew, she'd known he'd find out, and she'd planned for it, just like she'd planned everything else. His hands were shaking as he typed his response. "I'll be there." The game had changed again. But this time, he wasn't sure he wanted to win. Orson's voice crackled through the secure line at 6:47 a.m. 3 words that shattered Sienna's carefully constructed world. Valentina sold us. She was standing in the kitchen of the Dorchester apartment, watching Marisol eat scrambled eggs with the focused intensity only 3-year-olds could muster. Morning light streamed through reinforced windows. The coffee maker gurgled peacefully. Everything looked normal, safe, routine. Everything was a lie. How much does he know? Sienna kept her voice steady, moving toward the bedroom where her go-bag waited, already packed, always ready. Location of 2 safe houses, your operational structure, names of 3 secondary contacts. Orson's breathing was heavy, stressed. She gave them everything in exchange for immunity and relocation. Cassian's men are mobilizing now. You have maybe 40 minutes before they hit the Dorchester location. 40 minutes. She looked at Marisol, still eating her eggs, humming a song from her favorite cartoon. Oblivious, innocent, the only pure thing in Sienna's contaminated life. The backup location in Quincy. Compromised, Valentina knew about it. The storage unit in Somerville? Also compromised. Sienna's mind raced through contingencies, discarding options as fast as she considered them. 3 years of planning, 18 months of careful network building. All of it unraveling because she'd trusted the wrong person with too much information. There's one place Valentina didn't know about. She pulled the go-bag from under the bed, checked its contents with practiced efficiency. Cash, documents, weapons. My mother's cabin in New Hampshire. I never told anyone about it. Not even you. Sienna, I'll contact you when we're secure. Destroy the communication protocols. Scatter the network. Anyone who can run should run. She paused, something tightening in her chest. Thank you, Orson, for everything. Don't thank me yet. Just survive. The line went dead. Sienna moved through the apartment like water, gathering essentials, erasing traces. She'd rehearsed this scenario 100 times in her mind, but the reality felt different, heavier, final. Marisol, baby. She crouched beside her daughter's chair, forcing a smile she didn't feel. We're going on an adventure. Remember how Mama told you sometimes we might need to leave very fast? Gray eyes looked up at her, Cassian's eyes, filled with trust that made Sienna's heart crack. Like the practice game? Exactly like the practice game, but this time it's real. Can you be Mama's brave girl? Marisol nodded solemnly, abandoning her eggs without complaint. They'd practiced this. Monthly drills disguised as games, teaching a 3-year-old to move quickly and quietly without understanding why. It had felt paranoid. Now it felt like the only thing keeping them alive. 7 minutes later, they were in the car, a nondescript Honda she kept in a garage 3 blocks away, registered under a name that had never existed. Marisol was strapped into her car seat, clutching the stuffed rabbit she refused to sleep without. Sienna pulled onto the street, checking mirrors obsessively, heart hammering against her ribs. The drive to New Hampshire should take 2 hours. She'd planned routes, memorized back roads, prepared for exactly this moment. But knowing Cassian's men were hunting them transformed familiar highways into enemy territory. They were 40 minutes north of Boston when Marisol spoke. "Mama, who's my daddy?" The question hit like a bullet. Sienna's hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, had rehearsed answers that were honest without being complete, but not now. Not while they were running for their lives. Your daddy is someone Mama knew a long time ago, sweetheart. Is he nice? The highway blurred through sudden tears. Was Cassian nice? He'd been charming once, attentive. He'd brought her flowers and remembered her coffee order and made her believe she was loved. He wasn't always nice to Mama, she said carefully. Sometimes people disappoint us. Like when Petra forgot my birthday. Something like that, but bigger. Marisol considered this with the gravity only children possessed. Maybe he could learn to be nice. People can learn things. Sienna didn't answer, couldn't answer. Because somewhere beneath the rage and the planning and the 3 years of systematic revenge, a small part of her still wondered the same thing. The cabin appeared through snow-covered pines at 9:23 a.m. A modest structure her grandfather had built 50 years ago, passed to her mother, never mentioned in any legal document connected to Sienna's married name. She'd kept the taxes paid through an anonymous trust, kept the propane tanks filled, kept it ready for a day she'd prayed would never come. They were inside, fire starting in the wood stove, Marisol exploring the unfamiliar space with cautious excitement, when Sienna's burner phone buzzed. Unknown number, her blood chilled. She answered without speaking. "I know you're running." Cassian's voice, low and controlled, nothing like the cold businessman who'd handed her divorce papers 3 years ago. "Valentina gave us everything, but she didn't know about the cabin, did she? You always were smarter than anyone gave you credit for." "What do you want, Cassian?" "I want to meet my daughter." The words carried weight she hadn't expected, something almost like pain. "I want to understand how we got here. I want—" He stopped, started again. "The meeting tomorrow night, Christopher Columbus Park. It still stands. But Sienna? I'll protect you, even if it costs my life. Both of you, whatever you think of me, whatever I've done, she's my blood. And I'm done being the monster in your story." The line went dead. Sienna stared at the phone, trembling. Behind her, Marisol's voice rang out with innocent curiosity. "Mama, who were you talking to?" She turned. Her daughter stood in the doorway, rabbit clutched to her, chest, gray eyes wide and waiting. "Someone from a long time ago, baby." "Are they coming to visit?" Sienna looked at the phone, at her daughter, at the choice stretching before her like a blade. "Maybe," she whispered. "Maybe they are." Christopher Columbus Park lay silent under a blanket of fresh snow. The harbor beyond it black and still as held breath. Sienna arrived at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes early, and took position on the bench, where Cassian had proposed 4 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. Nothing about this moment was accidental. She'd left Marisol with Orson at the cabin, the only person she trusted enough for this, the only one who'd answered when she'd broken protocol and called. He'd driven through the night to reach them, armed and alert and asking no questions she wasn't ready to answer. The park was empty. December cold kept sensible people indoors, and the hour kept everyone else away. Sienna's breath fogged in the lamplight, her hands buried in her coat pockets, one wrapped around a compact pistol she hoped she wouldn't need. Cassian emerged from the shadows at exactly midnight, alone as promised, wearing a dark overcoat that made him look like a ghost from her past. He stopped 10 feet away, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You look different." His voice was quiet, stripped of the arrogance she remembered. "Stronger." "I am different. You made sure of that." He flinched. Actually flinched, like her words had physical weight. "I deserve that. You deserve worse." She didn't move from the bench, didn't invite him closer. "But I didn't come here for revenge, Cassian. I came for answers." "Ask." "Why?" The word contained 3 years of pain, compressed into a single syllable. "Why the divorce papers at my mother's funeral? Why Juliana? Why throw me away like I was nothing?" He was silent for a long moment, snow accumulating on his shoulders, his breath visible in the frozen air. When he spoke, his voice cracked on the edges. "Because my father ordered it. Because the Marcelino alliance was failing and Juliana was the price of saving it. Because I was too weak to tell him no, too blind to see what I was destroying." He took a step closer, then stopped when her hand shifted in her pocket. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But Sienna, I didn't know about Marisol. I swear to you, I didn't know. Would it have mattered?" The question hung between them, heavy as the snow-laden clouds above. "I don't know." His honesty was unexpected, disarming. "I want to say yes. I want to believe I would have been different if I'd known. But the man I was 3 years ago." He shook his head slowly. "That man was a coward, a puppet. Everything my father wanted and nothing worth having. And now? Now my father's dead. My marriage is a battlefield. My empire is crumbling. And the only thing I can think about is a daughter I've never met and a woman I destroyed who somehow became the most formidable enemy I've ever faced." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, bitter and admiring. "You're remarkable, Sienna. I was too stupid to see it when I had you. She wanted to hate him, had spent 3 years cultivating that hatred, feeding it, using it as fuel for everything she'd built. But sitting here, watching him stand in the cold with snow in his hair and something like genuine remorse in his eyes, she felt the hatred begin to fracture. I didn't do this for revenge. The admission surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Not entirely. I did it because you left me with nothing, and I had to become something. I did it because my mother died with secrets that could have protected me, and I wasn't going to let her sacrifice be meaningless. I did it because our daughter deserves a world where she's not a pawn in someone else's game. She's beautiful. His voice broke on the word. I saw photographs, Declan's surveillance. She has my eyes. She has my strength. I don't doubt it. They stared at each other across the snow-covered ground, two people who'd once shared a bed and a name and nothing real underneath. The wind picked up, swirling snowflakes between them like static on a dead channel. What happens now? Cassian asked. That depends on you. Sienna finally stood, keeping distance between them. I have enough evidence to destroy what's left of your organization. Names, accounts, recordings. Everything my mother collected, plus everything I've gathered since. One phone call, and it goes to the FBI, the Tomasis, and every news outlet in New England. But Marisol asks about her father. She wants to know if you're nice. Sienna's voice wavered despite her efforts. She wants to believe people can learn to be better. Cassian closed his eyes, something glistening on his lashes that might have been snowmelt or might have been tears. What do you want, Sienna? Not for revenge, not for strategy. What do you actually want? She thought about the question. Really thought, for the first time in 3 years, about something beyond survival and vengeance. I want out. The words came slowly, pulled from somewhere deep. I want Marisol to have a normal life. I want to stop running, stop fighting, stop being the ghost in everyone's machine. I want peace. And me? What role do I play in this peace? Before she could answer, headlights swept across the park. A convoy of vehicles, 3 SUVs, screeching to a halt at the entrance, doors flying open, armed men pouring out. Not Cassian's men. The insignia on their tactical gear belonged to someone else entirely, the Tomasis. Get down! Cassian lunged toward her as gunfire erupted, his body colliding with hers, driving them both behind the stone base of a monument. Bullets sparked off marble inches from her head. You led them here, she screamed over the chaos. No, Sienna, I swear. Blood was spreading, across his shoulder, dark against his coat. He'd been hit. Someone else sold us out, both of us. More gunfire, shouting, the sound of boots on snow. And above it all, Dominic Tomasi's voice, amplified by megaphone. Sienna Morrow, we know you have the ledger. Surrender now, and we let the girl live. Marisol. They knew about Marisol. Sienna's world narrowed to 3 facts. Cassian was bleeding, the Tomasis had found them, and someone had betrayed their location. The cabin. Orson, Marisol. Her daughter was 2 hours away with a man she trusted, but trust had already failed her once tonight. How bad? She pressed her hand against Cassian's shoulder, feeling hot blood pulse between her fingers. Survivable, if we get out of here. He was already pulling a weapon from his coat, checking the magazine with one hand while she applied pressure with both of hers. There's a service entrance to the aquarium, 50 yards east. I have a car waiting on Atlantic Avenue. You planned an escape route? I planned for everything except this. He met her eyes, pain and determination battling in his gaze. I didn't betray you, Sienna. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I didn't do this. Another volley of gunfire tore chunks from the monument sheltering them. She had seconds to decide. Trust the man who'd destroyed her life, or die in a park where he'd once promised her forever. East entrance. Go, they ran. The next 90 seconds were chaos, bullets singing past them, snow churning beneath their feet, Cassian's blood leaving a trail they couldn't hide. Sienna fired twice over her shoulder, not aiming to hit, just buying time. The aquarium loomed ahead, dark and closed for the night. But Cassian was right. A service door stood slightly ajar, propped open with a brick. Inside, the building was a labyrinth of darkened exhibits, tanks glowing with bioluminescent blue. They moved through halls of sleeping sea creatures, past jellyfish pulsing in endless loops, past sharks circling with patient menace. Who told them? Sienna demanded, supporting Cassian's weight as his steps faltered. Valentina only knew about my locations, not yours. Declan. Cassian's voice was strained, breathless. It has to be Declan. He's the only one who knew about the meeting. I trusted him. You trusted the wrong person. Again. Story of my life. They burst through an emergency exit onto Atlantic Avenue. A black sedan waited at the curb, engine running, driver's seat empty. Cassian had indeed planned for everything, except betrayal from the man he'd hired to find her. Sienna took the wheel. Cassian collapsed into the passenger seat, applying pressure to his wound with his own scarf. They were moving before the Tomases could circle the building, tires screaming on icy pavement, the Boston skyline receding in the rearview mirror. She drove north, toward New Hampshire, toward Marisol, toward the only thing that mattered. Why did you do it? She asked when they'd cleared the city limits, when the adrenaline had faded enough for questions to surface. Cover me back there. Take a bullet. Why? Cassian's laugh was weak, pained. Because I meant what I said. About protecting you. About being done being the monster. He turned his head, gray eyes finding hers in the darkness. I threw away the only real thing I ever had because I was too much of a coward to fight for it. I won't make that mistake again. Pretty words from a bleeding man. Then let me prove them. Help me destroy Declan. Help me end the Tomasi threat. And then, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Then let me meet my daughter, not as a father, not yet. I haven't earned that. Just as someone who wants to learn how to be better. The cabin appeared through the trees at 3:17 a.m. Orson met them at the door, weapon raised, lowering it only when he saw Sienna's face. Behind him, through the doorway, Marisol was visible on the couch, asleep under a blanket, rabbit clutched to her chest. Safe. She was safe. Sienna turned to Cassian, still bleeding, still barely standing, and made the decision that would define everything that came next. You get one chance. Her voice was steel wrapped in exhaustion. One chance to prove you're not the man who left me at that funeral. You help me take down Declan and neutralize the Tomasis. You sign over controlling interest in the Aldrich Holdings to a trust for Marisol, and you walk away from the life that made you into someone I had to destroy. And if I do all that, then maybe, you get to know your daughter, but Cassian. She stepped closer, close enough to see the hope flickering in his eyes. If you disappoint her the way you disappointed me, I won't destroy your empire. I'll destroy you. Completely. Permanently. Do you understand? Yes. Then we have a deal. She helped him inside, laid him on the floor near the fire, and began treating his wound with supplies from her go-bag. Orson stood guard. Marisol slept on, oblivious to the war being waged around her small, perfect life. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, erasing the evidence of the night's violence. Somewhere in Boston, Declan Holt was realizing his betrayal had failed. Somewhere else, Dominic Tomasi was screaming at his men about the woman who'd escaped again. But here, in a cabin no one knew about, Sienna Morrow sat beside the man who'd destroyed her and began building something new from the ashes. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but possibility, and for the first time in 3 years, that was enough. Hello, beautiful family. My daughter challenged me to hit 1,000 subscribers. So now you're all involved. Let's show her that nothing is impossible with a family behind you. Subscribe and comment below with where you're watching from. I want to know, because seeing all your locations reminds me that stories connect us. All, no matter the distance. Thank you.